We lost ourselves, lost our dream. In the pursuit of great, we failed to do good.
Alright, let's talk about the number one main complaint that both fans and critics have of Arcane Season 2, its pacing. Yes, it is bad. Broken, as a matter of fact. I've saved talking about this for last because 1, everybody has been talking about it, and 2, barely anyone has talked about the consequences of it. It's what leads to the characters being inconsistent, the themes feeling shallow and contradictory to Season 1, and the world building feeling like it's bending inward upon itself. There have been plenty of videos going over the various plot holes and contrivances due to this, but what I want to look at is the why. I am going to be the most critical in this part, because what I'm about to explore, I believe, is a huge pitfall that ruins a lot of modern Western stories. I also apologize for not coming out with this video on the times that I said I would. I wanted to push myself with this one and greatly underestimated how long it would take, and life also just got pretty busy. So, why is Season 2's pacing broken? One of the biggest fixes among critics and fans for Arcane Season 2 is that it needed more time. While extra episodes or a third season could have helped, I don't think more time was the actual solution. I do think they could have wrapped up all the plotlines from Season 1 in the same time frame and even with the same kind of 3 acts. More time doesn't always mean a story would be better, and less time doesn't always mean a story would be worse. How the time it's given is utilized is what matters most. This is called efficiency. This is what I think Season 1's biggest strength is. Despite its pacing also being fast in parts, its efficiency in relaying the right amount of information to the audience for them to clearly understand and experience the cause and effects of what is going on is impeccable. Cause and effect are what allows us as the audience to understand the logical through lines of what is going on within a story, and it is vital to communicate and explore both of them. I'm going to pull the trigger and become the 1000th YouTuber that shows this clip of Matt Stone and Trey Parker.
We can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words "and then" belong between those beats, you're f***ed. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word "therefore" or "but," right? So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, okay, this happens, right? And then this happens. No, it should be this happens, and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens.
This clip is used a lot because it is one of the most efficient pieces of writing advice on the internet. Therefore but writing not only communicates the effect of something, but also explores the cause, thus communicating cause and effect clearly. And then writing will usually communicate the effect, but the cause will tend to be insufficient. Season 1 for the most part goes by therefore but writing, where the causes were explored as were the effects. The entire season is focused on exploring the characters, their traits, flaws, the choices they make from these, and the effects and reactions the other characters have to them. Vi decides to tell Powder that she isn't ready and to stay back as they go to get Vander. Therefore, Powder has a mental breakdown, but she then remembers the explosion that one of the hex crystals set off at Jace's apartment, and therefore decides to use one to try to save Vi, Vander, Milo, and Clagger. This kind of focus allowed the writers to not just present the cause and effects, but to also explore them, which allowed them to focus on being consistent with its characters and world. The season isn't perfect, but for the most part, whenever a character made a decision, it fell right in line with their established characterization. All of this created strong threads of cause and effect within the major plotlines that earned the forgiveness of the occasional plot hole, contrivance, or Caitlyn seemingly enchanting herself with max-level blast protection. Season 2 mostly seems to go by and then writing. A lot of the effects of the character arcs are shown and explored, but the causes are thin at best, usually relying heavily on one line of dialogue.
We use the Grey to clear the streets, to keep people safe.
Oh, really?
Or ambiguous subtext of character expressions for justification. Vi helps Piltover fight against Rennie and her gang at the memorial, and then she puts on the Enforcer outfit.
What?
We had the effect here, but not really the cause. The narrative seems to lean heavily on the subtext when Maddie so happened to show up and butter Vi up by claiming she became a legend, the fact that Vi fought with Piltover at the memorial, and her conflicted looks as she walks up in the outfit, but none of it is really clear. The problem isn't that she shows up in an enforcer outfit, it's that it's not explored from her perspective at all before or afterwards. She was established as a Zonite who hated the enforcers for killing her parents, as she tells Caitlin in Season 1 and also reminds her at the start of Season 2.
What, you don't have parents?
No. They were killed by enforcers. I watched them kill my parents. Do you have any idea how that feels?
Relegating the cause to her character-defining decision here to being ambiguous is inefficient storytelling. It's fine and a good thing to have some things within a story be left open for people to speculate on, as it can be a fun and engaging part of storytelling. Huge character moments, however, should not be relegated to this. When a character is shown making a decision that is opposite of their previously established characterization or are acting opposite to it, the cause of that needs to be explored. Otherwise, it will create gaping holes in the narrative that relies on the audience to write in themselves, which is what is called doing the writer's job for them. The few instances that this is kind of okay to do is, say, an ambiguous ending, leaving how it ended open for the audience to speculate on, which happens a lot in psychological thrillers. Vi's decision here, however, is a major off-screen character decision done in the dead center of her story. It is the job of the storyteller to give a sufficient amount of information for the audience to understand and experience what happened and is happening, with clear, logical through lines. Whenever the audience feels the need to explain away a hole in the narrative, that is a failure on the storyteller's part. Any plot hole can be explained away, but truth is, it doesn't matter how much we try to tighten the story up for the writers. It still doesn't negate the fact that these major holes still exist. Subtext gives a story deeper meaning to pull out of it. Due to its nature, it's going to be mostly subjective. People are going to interpret character expressions, body language, tone, and symbolism, and so on, differently. However, subtext is meant to enhance a story, not be used as an excuse for replacing the clear surface text within it. The question is why does Season 2 do this? It's because of where its focus is. A good way to showcase this difference in focus and thus efficiency is looking at the difference between Vander's arc in Act 1 of Season 1 and Caitlin's arc in Act 1 of Season 2. I am aware that these are two different kinds of characters. My point in comparing them is to show that more screen time doesn't always equal better. Vander has far less screen time in Act 1 of Season 1 than Caitlin does in Act 1 of Season 2. However, his arc communicates everything the audience needs to know in a much more efficient way. His actions in the opening, his conversation with Vi on the bridge, his conversation with Silco at the warehouse, and the flashbacks of what happened between him and Silco give the audience a sufficient amount of information to infer that he was once a violent revolutionary who was best friends with Silco, and they both shared a vision on how to fight against Piltover and create the nation of Zon. His reaction after coming across a young Vi and Powder and realizing that his actions got their parents killed relates to the audience that he has decided to lay down his weapons and make it right by raising them and trying to make the Undercity less violent. His conversations with Vi shows that he views violence as not the answer to their problems.
This is not going to solve your problems. Just makes more of them.
However, his conversation with Marcus in Episode 2 shows that he is not a pacifist and is willing to get violent if he has no other options.
It'd be a shame if I had to put them on again.
After what can be inferred as possibly a 5-year-long time jump after the opening, he has become an unofficial leader through the influence that he has of how much people seem to respect him, as shown in his interactions with Hook and the two people he was trading with.
You're Vander.
Hound of the Underground.
After Vi and the gang's shenanigans in Topside, he is forced to speak to Grayson, the current sheriff of Piltover. The dialogue in this one conversation gives the audience a sufficient amount of information to show that problems with Topside is something that he is willing to negotiate with the very people oppressing him in order to avoid. We're also given the information that he is not willing to give up his own people, and when he realizes that Vi is about to give herself up, decides to give himself up instead and let Benzo take over. His conversation with Vi after their shenanigans in Topside and with Benzo at his pawn shop relays the information that he is a part of criminal activity in the Undercity. However, he is not okay with Vi, the gang, and anybody doing anything in Topside.
This world.
I also told you time and time again the North Side's off limits.
After being captured by Silco, being the unfortunate victim of Powder trying to save all of them, witnessing the deaths of Milo and Clagger and his back now against the wall, we get the most spine-chilling payoff in the entire show. Vander, the non-violent unofficial leader of the Undercity's traits, are thoroughly pushed to their limits to the point that his violent revolutionary ways re-emerges. From the information given during this, we can infer that he knows that he is going to die, so he tries to take out as much of Silco's men as possible to get back at him and to protect Vi. He even takes Shimmer and becomes a monster, proving Silco right. He then dies, whether from the impact of falling, a possible overdose from taking Shimmer, or a mixture of both. Vander in Act 1 of Season 1 is what I call condensed perfection. He is a masterfully crafted character with zero wasted scenes or lines of dialogue. Each scene he is in and every line of dialogue he says relays enough information to the audience to experience who he is, what he is about, what his motives are, why he is doing what he is doing, and so on. The cause and effects of his character are crystal clear and strong, which makes the payoff in episode 3 hit very hard. Any subtext to his expressions, tone, body language, and so on are there to enhance the already clear writing of his character. He has a full-on arc that is set up, built up to a devastating payoff, and is done with in just roughly 27 minutes of screen time. Caitlin is the main character of Act 1 of Season 2, as she has more screen time than any other character that act. Her being vengeful against Jinx is 100% coherent and a very interesting direction for her to go. However, the way it is executed is not all that efficient. Her beginning, however, is fantastic. The funeral montage at the beginning of episode 1 is beautiful. The lyrics to the heart-wrenching song, "I Can't Hear It Now," conveys the guilt she feels for not stopping Jinx. She continues to convey this guilt in her conversation with Jace, expressing that one violent act can cause a person to hate.
How easy it is to hate them. One vicious act.
However, her referring to them here to speak about the people of Zaun does feel like a bit of a way to force her into what becomes a very obvious revenge arc. Perhaps she's speaking about the bigotry towards Zaun that people like Salo shows, but Caitlyn's entire arc in Season 1 was about learning the nuances of the Undercity, so she should know that them are not the problem, but one person. She even relays this information to Mel at the beginning of episode 1.
Officer Kiraman witnessed the attack firsthand. She confirmed this was the act of a single deranged individual.
Jinx.
In her conversation with Vi, she seems to also forget that Vi has trauma when it comes to putting on the Enforcer badge, and when Vi refuses, she says,
I thought you were on our side.
What?
We as the audience have not been given an adequate amount of information to believe she has a good reason to say or believe this, when Vi showed her she was obviously not with Jinx. After the memorial attack, her anger towards the Undercity is heightened, mainly because Jace didn't relay the information to what Rennie's motives actually were.
A memorial? What kind of animals?
This, from Caitlyn's perspective here, makes sense for her. Unfortunately, how it got here, by her forgetting key things that were part of her arc in Season 1, and Jace not relaying important information to her, unfortunately created holes and contrivances within the narrative leading up to this. She then imposes herself at a council meeting declaring herself a decorative officer. This is where the once dirty world building of Season 1 starts to bend itself in order to get Caitlyn to the very specific beats the writers seem to really want her to go. She was previously fired from being an enforcer and now is somehow able to impose herself as a decorative officer, while the remaining council just watches and says nothing. The only information we as the audience is given on this is that the Kierman name is apparently just that influential, and that she might have used this to blackmail the enforcers.
It's not the girl. It's the name. It bewitches people.
This happens again at the end of episode 3 when Mbessa, an interloper from another nation, is able to dub Caitlyn the Chief Commander, because Mel and Jace conveniently got teleported away to their own subplots. None of the remaining enforcers, except for Loris, nor the other houses present, oppose Caitlyn being Chief Commander and collectively beat their breasts. Them wanting martial law makes sense due to Jinx's constant attacks on them, but the way Caitlyn being a rookie, then fired enforcer in Season 1 was established makes her becoming a dictator here quite ridiculous. She makes the wild decision to gas the Undercity, which is a decision that very, very much crosses a line, especially towards Vi. After nearly thinking of killing Hinot, Vi decides to have a private conversation with her, which is a perfect opportunity to explore the why she decided to jump off a cliff into chemical warfare, and even how Vi feels about it. Instead, they have a conversation about Vi not wanting her to change, despite her essentially being a completely different person now, and how they need to send the rest of the strike team home. Her and Vi then encounter Jinx and Savika, and a fight between them ensues. This fight prioritizes spectacle over character-driven drama that could have explored what she and the other characters are genuinely going through, like the ending of Episode 3 of Season 1 did. What I mean by this is that the end of Episode 3 of Season 1 had more of a focus on exploring the characters' tension with one another through their conversations and the emotional tone it gave off, creating an emotionally satisfying climax. While the end of Episode 3 of Season 2 does the opposite, spending more time on the fight scene that has a more epic tone than the emotional one, and less on the conversations the characters should be having with one another that can be satisfying from an action set-piece point of view, but not really from an emotional or narrative one. After Vi stops her from shooting near Isha, she decides that Vi is no different from Jinx and hits her with the butt of her gun.
I keep telling myself that you're different, but you're not. It's her blood in your veins.
She has no good reason to say or believe this here. We as the audience are supposed to just go with this because this is just who she is now. But the chains of cause and effect leading to this moment are broken. We got here by her forgetting important realizations she had in Season 1 and characters failing to confront her or relay important information to her. Some of it relies on the fact that her mother was murdered, which makes sense as to why she wants revenge, but is a cop-out answer for why she becomes so flanderized into this new aspect of her character. Despite her having 43 minutes of screen time in Act 1 of Season 2, her arc still feels rushed. The focus with her here is more on the idea of her being vengeful and going so far as to commit chemical warfare, but the complexity and nuances that could have been explored through the why of it are not, whereas the focus of the why of a character with less screen time like Vander in Season 1 is. This is why her arc feels rushed. It's inefficient in how it relays information for her. It causes the audience to have to dig through subtext to try and come up with their own theories to tighten her story up for the writers. Whereas Vander's arc in Season 1 was crystal clear while not hand-holding the audience either. I think her revenge arc could have worked in Act 1 with the same amount of screen time, possibly even less if the focus was in the right place. And this happens throughout much of Season 2. Vi becomes a nihilistic alcoholic mess, and then she doesn't. Jinx is a nihilistic mentally ill mess who wants to die, and then she isn't. Victor is opposed to using the Hex Core and Hex Tech, and then he isn't. Heimerdinger is very cautious about the use of the Arcane, and then he isn't. Savika hates Jinx and sees her as a liability, and then she doesn't. The only characters whose why is thoroughly explored is Jace and Echo in Episode 7, which is one of the reasons why it's a fan favorite of the season. Unfortunately, it cannibalizes screen time in an already pressed-for-time season. If it was Episode 7 of Season 2 of a 5-season show, then there would be no problem. But, unfortunately, it's not. How efficient a story is at telling its story is arguably the most important aspect of it. It's not just about presenting every plot beat and idea, but also relaying the right amount of information for the causes and effects through it to be explored and crystal clear. This is why Season 2's pacing feels very fast and rushed. The effects of the characters and the fact that they've reacted to what happened to them is shown, but the causes are not explored, making it feel like the narrative is speedrunning through major details. And it's all in the name of hitting highly desired payoffs. Setups and payoffs are the sequences of events that make up a story's plot. In order to have a hard-hitting payoff, there needs to be well-established and explored setups. Again, more time does not always equal better for the setups, but how efficiently the time is used. The best stories spend time exploring both, like Season 1 did. The problem is when stories get too focused on their payoffs. When this happens, the setups will tend to be thin, brushing over them in order to force the payoffs to happen. Caitlyn's arc in Season 2 has too much of a focus on the plot beats of her progressing further into her revenge arc, while skipping over and not taking the time to explore the setups getting to them. She makes the jump from being vengeful against Jinx to Zaun itself, to using the gray gas against them to lumping Vi in with all of them without properly exploring the why. Vander's arc focused on exploring both the setups and the payoffs, which again is why the payoff and him reverting back to his violent ways as a last resort hits so hard in episode 3. This is the fundamental difference between the writing of both seasons. I have one more thing I want to talk about in my series. Let's talk about tone. Tone is the feeling and impression that the writing within a story gives off. Tone is a whole complex spectrum of different combinations that one could write an entire book on the subject if they wanted to. The major thing about tone within writing, much like many other things, is consistency with the main one established, which Season 1 also balances very well. From the beginning of Episode 1, the series establishes a dark, gritty atmosphere with a statement on the cycle of violence, how violence is hell, and the best thing to do about it is to walk away. This is the baseline tone the series establishes for itself. Season 1 does a masterful job keeping to this. Anytime it dips into other tones, it reels itself back into this baseline one. Season 2 suffers greatly from tonal inconsistencies and dissonance. It falls into the trap of trying to be more lighthearted, humorous, and bombastic than its predecessor in a lot of scenes, but at the expense of it needing to be serious and gritty when these happens, thus creating an awkward atmosphere that comes across as self-indulgent and contradictive to Season 1's baseline tone and themes. The idea of Heimerdinger loosening up through his bonding with Echo is a solid one, but he is so flanderized into this aspect of himself that he acts like a total clown while sneaking into the academy and talking to Jace. When his colleagues just got bombed and his greatest fears with the Arcane are manifesting right before him. The writers thought that slapstick humor was appropriate for Jinx during Act 2 because she became a completely different person off screen, thus cheapening how seriously her mental illness was explored in Season 1. The Hellfire music sequence gives off a rave-style tone while Caitlyn, Vi, and the strike team commit acts of police brutality, resulting in the most tone-deaf sequence in the entire show. Warwick's intro falls completely into the pit of self-indulgence to create an epic intro to a highly anticipated league champion at the expense of how horrifying the situation actually is for its characters. The entire final battle and the finale swings back and forth from being indulgent in how epic and awesome it wants to be with its spectacle, while trying to showcase how violence is hell by showing the deaths of tertiary characters in a way that makes it hard to take seriously. The series then ends trying to be tragic with all the war and death that happened, but due to how bombastic and indulgent the action scenes were up to this point, it fails to hit as hard as it could have. It tries to stay true to the walking away from violence theme shown with Vander in the opening, through Jinx faking her death and going away to try to break the supposed cycle between her and Vi, but due to how forced and accelerated her arc was, it comes across as a shallow, immature, trite version of that. Despite Vander walking away, he still had to partake in society, tried to make it better, and still ended up facing the consequences for his past, which was far more of a mature and honest take on that idea. Season 1 struck a balance of reeling itself back into its baseline tone and themes anytime it swinged into the realm of self-indulgence. Vi and Jace raiding the Shimmer Factory is treated as an epic league champion moment. However, it reels the tone back into what was set up through Jace being trigger happy and accidentally shooting a child. The music stops and it affects him greatly. Echo vs Jinx on the bridge is also treated as a league champion moment with a fantastic visual storytelling and music. However, it then reels back to the actual fight, which is quick and brutal. Due to the season's grounded setting, its fight scenes were gritty and personal, which allowed the writing of them to be solid, focused, and impactful. Season 2 lacks this grounded setting, going for spectacle, resulting in the writing of these scenes to be silly at best and downright ridiculous at worst. Using a lot of slow motion, cutting away when characters are about to hit one another, and contriving ways for them to get out of near-death situations. Season 1 staying consistent with its tone made it seem far more mature in how it handles its themes and made it far easier to take seriously. Season 2's obsession with indulgent spectacle make it feel like it's betraying Season 1's tone and themes, and thus makes it harder to take seriously whenever it tries to get serious and dark. So, in conclusion, Arcane goes from a grounded, character-driven story in Season 1 that was focused on exploring its characters and their struggles, resulting in the narrative exploring both its setups and payoffs in unison, resulting in strong threads of cause and effect in its script that earned the forgiveness of a few plot holes and contrivances, with themes of oppression and the trauma and mental illness it creates, the base violence necessary for change when it comes to fighting against it, the perils of progressing new technology too fast and becoming too ambitious with it, and the cycle of war and violence. To an end-of-the-universe event-driven story in Season 2 that has too much of a focus on hitting its self-indulgent payoffs, claiming them to be conceptual, resulting in a lot of the setups being thin at best in order to force the payoffs to happen, resulting in broken threads of cause and effect in its script, full of plot holes and contrivances that never really earned the forgiveness for them. Major events happen a lot of the times through music montages. The montages themselves in isolation are artistically fantastic, and most of the songs are bangers. However, they get used as a narrative cheat code to slingshot the story forward, with the amount of time that passes being mostly unspecified. The montages in Season 1 helped aid and enhance what was already clearly going on, spanning minutes at max, not replacing entire plot beats. The season tries to go for an opposites idea where the characters are inverse from who they were in Season 1, but due to its overindulgent focus on its plot beats, it achieves this by having the characters ignore relaying very important information to one another, fail to acknowledge elephants in the room, and make decisions that insult their previously established intelligences, making them feel like they're making sudden reversals as opposed to their changes feeling organic and natural. A lot of the character beats happen off-screen, with the why of it never really being explored, usually relying on ambiguous subtext and a single line of dialogue for justification. Echo, Heimerdinger, Jace, and Mel are all taken out of the main story and put into their own subplots. Mel's leeches screen time when it absolutely shouldn't have in order to set her up for the Noxus show, and despite episode 7 being the only episode in the season to actually explore the journeys of two characters, it unfortunately cannibalizes screen time in an already cram-packed season. All of this results in a very inefficient way of telling its story that unfortunately sucks the nuance and complexity out of the characters and thus the themes that could have been explored in depth through them. Many of the concepts and ideas throughout Season 2 get picked up, skated across at a surface level, and then dropped for something else. The themes of oppression and revolution that the first season revolved around and teased a closer for in Season 2 are concluded in a way that feels shallow in order to pivot to much more broader themes of fate, evolution, legacy, and human imperfections. The season also goes for indulgent spectacle, which creates seemingly awkward contradictions to Season 1's established cycle of violence theme, creates tonal dissonance for itself, and creates ridiculously contrived action scenes compared to the raw, focused, and personal ones in Season 1. The world building is bent and contorted, causing groups of people to become incompetent in order to help the characters get to their payoffs more easily. And all of this is super frustrating, because everything else with Season 2 is phenomenal. The animation is groundbreaking and never lets up. The music is stellar, the voice acting, much like with Season 1, is some of the best in animation. The themes and ideas themselves, in theory, are interesting, and the presentation to a lot of the scenes individually are excellent. Unfortunately, the writing is inconsistent, messy, and unfocused, especially compared to how tight, consistent, and focused Season 1's was. There are parts where it gets close to something consistent and focused, but when you span out and look at it as a whole, it unfortunately falls apart. And I get it, the presentation to a lot of the scenes being fantastic can really hit on people's emotions and are great in isolation. However, stories are not scenes in isolation. They are a sequence of events, and how those sequences connect matter. How we get to these scenes matter. Animation, voice acting, music, and presentation are there to enhance the writing, not do the heavy lifting. There is a skeleton of a story that could have been a masterpiece within Season 2. It needed to focus more on exploring the causes as well as the effects of its characters, instead of desperately bulleting its way to its self-indulgent payoffs. Season 1 ends with Jinx declaring Powder within her dead, accepting a negative self-concept that's been imposed on her all her life, insinuating that her and Vi's sister relationship would take a lot to get back to where it was, and despite not caring about the politics, restarts the cycle of war between Piltover and Zahn. We get the continuation of that in Season 2, but it's over and done with at such a shallow level before pivoting entirely to Victor and Noxus, making it feel like it sped ran through its conclusion. And as I stated in the efficiency section, this is the fundamental difference between the writing of both seasons. Season 1 has a simple plot, but it allowed the writing to really focus on its characters and have the plot drive from their choices, resulting in a tight and coherent script. Season 2 has a much more ambitious plot that unfortunately gets more convoluted as it goes, especially with the addition of a multiverse and time travel, resulting in the plot yanking the characters along wherever it demands them to be, resulting in an unfocused and far less tight script. Simple does not always equal shallow and bad, and ambitious doesn't always equal more artistic and better. Sometimes, the best stories are able to be the best, with a simpler plot that allows it to really focus on its characters. The more complex and ambitious a story gets, the more a writer's talents are going to be tested. Season 2 of Arcane is unfortunately a story that, as a whole, I personally cannot take seriously. And I'm supposed to take it seriously. But due to the threads of cause and effect in it being this broken, I unfortunately can't. I can't help but see the hand of the writers in just about every aspect of it. There are individual scenes that I like, and there are songs like To Ashes and Blood, The Line, and the French song I refuse to pronounce that I like. But the story as a whole I do not care for as a continuation to Season 1. The relationship I got most invested in was Vi and Jinx's sisterhood. My investment in them is super high in Season 1, and by the time it gets to the end of Season 2 and Jinx says,
Always with you, sis.
I feel nothing. I don't mean to sound cynical saying this, but this is my honest opinion. I would be lying otherwise. I feel much more emotion toward the climaxes of each of the 3 acts in Season 1 than I do towards any of the ones in Season 2, and it's because of how consistent, coherent, and focused the threads of cause and effect are getting to them in Season 1, making them all feel inevitable, as opposed to predictable or forced. How tight the script is in Act 1 of Season 1 makes the last 5 to 10 minutes of Episode 3 feel completely inevitable, and one of my favorite climaxes in media. There's almost nothing I would change within its script except a few inconsequential things, and despite there being parts of Acts 2 and 3 that could have been tightened up a bit more, the threads of cause and effect are still strong enough that they still feel inevitable and play into the hard-hitting tragedies that they are. Whereas in Season 2, though the fight between Vi and Jinx at the end of Act 1 is a blood-pumping spectacle, I find myself mostly frustrated with the ridiculous contrivances that happen throughout it. There are a lot of different and better ways that the writers could have written that scene to play out. I find myself mostly shocked at how ridiculous, absurd, and unnecessary Isha's sacrifice is at the end of Act 2 than I was at how manipulatively sad the writers obviously wanted it to be. And due to the threads of cause and effect being as broken as they are, Victor becoming one with the Omnissiah just happening with very little expiration, and the amount of time that is wasted leading up to the series finale in Act 3, I feel nothing during it. Season 1 will always be one of my favorite pieces of media and thus seasons of television ever, and one of my biggest artistic inspirations. And fortunately, though the characters were written to have continuations because the second season was definitely in mind during its production, it does wrap itself up narratively and thematically. The ending can be viewed as a tragedy/cautionary tale, where the cycle of violence has been restarted due to Jinx, and Piltover and Zaun will get plunged into war. On one hand, I understand why people love Season 2. As I said in Part 1, despite me thinking that the writing is not that good as a whole, I don't think it's a bad piece of media as a whole package. Its animation and production has more time and care put into it than most pieces of media nowadays, and its individual scenes, especially due to how much of a good job Season 1 did at making the audience care about its characters, definitely can pull at the heartstrings. On the other hand, I also understand why there are people who say that it's one of the biggest drops in quality between 2 seasons of television that they have ever seen. It has major shifts in its theme and world building, narrative focus, character development, and tone that it almost feels like a completely different show. Season 1 is very efficient and consistent in how it tells its story, and Season 2 is almost the exact opposite. And I don't think it being rushed and to finish what might have been a Season 3 or 4 into just 1 is an excuse. Andor Season 2 just wrapped up, and it had the same exact problem happen, where it was originally planned for 4 to 5 seasons and was forced to cram the rest of it into Season 2. Despite it being rushed in some parts, it's far more efficient in its storytelling than Season 2 of Arcane is, because it focuses on exploring the setups and payoffs of its characters and plot in unison, thus making them feel way more consistent. It doesn't get bogged down by focusing on indulgent spectacle, and whenever it happens, it feels completely earned and doesn't take away from the series' baseline tone and themes. How a story is focused, consistent, and efficient it is at telling its story is what will ultimately make it a good and timeless story. I understand the empathy for the writers, but putting all the blame on Netflix or Riot obfuscates their agency. They still had the choice to not get too focused on indulgent payoffs and thus get way too plot heavy. I think that they are talented in that they seem to be hyper creative in coming up with ideas that most people don't think about, but are in desperate need of having a developmental editor with them to keep their stories consistent and coherent, which it seems they had during the writing of Season 1, but didn't have during the writing of Season 2 based upon the change in the writing room, as Season 2's problem isn't between a character-driven versus a plot-driven story. It's a problem of consistency and focus. And as I stated in part 1 of my series, it is healthy for there to be people pointing out where a story faltered, because that is how we make art and writing great. And that is my series on why Season 2 of Arcane is much more contentious than its predecessor. Thank you all for sticking with me on this. I greatly appreciate the support for it. There are many other problems with Season 2 I could have touched upon, like the addition and convolution of the multiverse and time travel, the moral landmines that is Jinx and Isha's relationship, and Echo embodying alternate Echo while romanticizing alternate Powder, how the season sets up new rules for its magic system and then breaks them directly afterwards, the Blisters and Bedrock flashback and how it retcons both Silco and Vander, but there are plenty of other videos going in depth over those. My goal with this series was to go broad and look at the major shifts of the story's major facets in Season 2, in which these other smaller things are just the symptoms of. I'll probably release more Arcane content periodically in the future, going over individual characters, how well I think they're written in Season 1, and how I think Season 2 unfortunately more than likely fumbles them, like Jinx, Silco, and Victor for instance, as those are my 3 favorites from Season 1. My next project will be a positive one. It will be on something that I think is genuinely excellent from beginning to end, because, you know.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
So yeah, thank you all for watching. When it comes to future League of Legends shows, I'm interested in them mainly due to Fortitia's animation, because it is now my favorite kind, even surpassing anime for me. Unfortunately, I'm back to being skeptical of how the writing will turn out due to how Season 2 of Arcane's was handled. And whether or not I'll do videos over them depends on if I feel like I have something to say about them. So yeah, if Season 2 of Arcane was treated with the same care as Season 1, man.
What could have been?